As I stood in the doorway, the weight of the world crashed down on me. The sight of my wife, her laughter mingling with the voice of my college professor, felt like a dagger to my heart. They were sitting together at our kitchen table, their heads bent close, sharing a private joke that had no place in our home. I had trusted her, believed in our vows, and now betrayal hung thick in the air. My mind raced, a whirlwind of disbelief and anger. How could she do this to us, to me? I had always thought of my marriage as a fortress, strong, unwavering, built on the foundation of love and mutual respect. But in that moment, I felt like an intruder in my own life, peering into a secret that had been kept from me. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest, fighting the urge to storm in and demand answers. Instead, I chose to retreat, to process what I had just witnessed. The disbelief morphed into a sickening realization that I had been betrayed by the two people I trusted the most. That night, I confronted her. My voice trembled with a mix of rage and sorrow. "How could you?" I demanded, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I could see it in her face, the guilt, the shame, the realization that I had caught her in the act. But instead of a confession, there was a wall of silence, a defensive posture that only fueled my anger. "Please, just let me explain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want explanations. I wanted to understand how she could throw away everything we had built together. I needed to know if it was him or if there had been others before him. The truth spilled out, and with it my world shattered. Each word she spoke felt like a nail being driven into my heart. Days turned into a blur of confusion and anguish. The initial shock transformed into a burning desire for clarity. I became a man possessed. I needed to know everything. I scoured through emails, texts, and social media, piecing together the timeline of their affair. Each revelation felt like salt in an open wound, but I was determined to make him pay. I learned that their affair had started months before, right under my nose while I was busy with work and life. The details were agonizing: secret meetings, stolen kisses, and the thrill of betrayal. I felt sickened by the thought of how she had shared intimate moments with him, moments that were supposed to be ours. My heart ached, and my mind raced with questions that had no answers. As I gathered evidence, I also found myself grappling with moral dilemmas. What should I do with this knowledge? Exposing her was one thing, but what about the professor? He was a man of authority, a figure I had respected once. But now he was the enemy, a predator who had taken advantage of my wife's vulnerability. I wrestled with the idea of revenge, weighing the consequences of my actions. Would it be worth it? Would it make me feel better to see him lose everything? I spent sleepless nights plotting my next steps, my emotions swinging between anger and despair. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive her, to salvage what was left of our marriage. But the thought of him, sitting in his office, basking in the power he had over her made my blood boil. I wanted him to feel the same pain I was enduring, to understand the destruction he had caused in our lives. Eventually, I decided I needed to confront the professor directly. I wanted to see the look in his eyes when I laid bare the truth. I found him in his office, surrounded by books that once inspired me, the very same books that had filled my mind with dreams of success and knowledge. Now, they felt like a betrayal in themselves. "You think you can take what's mine and get away with it?" I spat, my voice low and dangerous. His smug demeanor faltered, and for a moment I saw fear in his eyes. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the confrontation that would set the stage for everything to come. I wanted him to know that I wouldn't let this slide. I wouldn't allow him to continue his life without facing the consequences of his actions. As I stood there, the tension in the room crackled like electricity. I could feel the weight of my anger pushing against the walls, demanding to be released. This was just the beginning of my plan, and I was ready to take action. The days following my confrontation with the professor were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. I felt like I was living in a surreal nightmare, where the person I had loved for years had become a stranger. My perception of my wife shifted dramatically. The woman I once adored now felt like a ghost of her former self, a mere shadow haunted by her choices. I was drowning in a sea of conflicting feelings, desperately trying to make sense of it all. Each time I looked at her, memories of our happier moments flashed before my eyes, tainted by the reality of her infidelity. The laughter we shared, the plans we made, all felt like a cruel joke now. I had given her my heart, my trust, and she had shattered it. I could no longer see her as the loving partner I once knew. Instead, I viewed her through a lens of betrayal and disappointment. The pain of her betrayal was a constant ache in my chest, a reminder of the life we used to share. I spent hours replaying our conversations, searching for clues I had missed. There were subtle changes in her behavior, little signs that now screamed at me with clarity. Late nights at work, unexplained absences, and the way she would smile at her phone, as if it held secrets meant only for her. I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for placing my trust in someone who had so easily broken it. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I began to formulate a plan. I couldn't let the professor walk away unscathed, and I needed to gather evidence that would expose the affair. I immersed myself in research, combing through old emails, texts, and any digital footprints they had left behind. It was a harrowing task, but I was driven by a need for justice, a desire to reclaim my narrative. I started documenting everything. Dates, times, and content of conversations became my obsession. I even created a timeline of their affair, meticulously piecing together the moments they had shared. Each new discovery felt like a dagger, but I was relentless. I needed to ensure that when I confronted the school board, I would have irrefutable proof of the betrayal that had destroyed my marriage. Still, as I delved deeper into this dark world of deception, I wrestled with moral dilemmas. Was I being just in my pursuit of revenge, or was I allowing my anger to guide me into a dark place? I questioned whether I was becoming the very thing I despised. There was a part of me that yearned for reconciliation, to find a way to heal the wounds, but the thought of him still lingered like a shadow, reminding me of the betrayal. When I finally felt ready to take action, I made a list of everything I would need to present to the school board. My heart raced at the thought of standing in that room, laying bare the truth of their affair. I could already envision the looks of shock on the faces of the board members as I unveiled the evidence. It felt exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Before I could proceed, I needed to confront my wife one last time. I wanted her to know what I had discovered, to understand the depth of her betrayal. I found her in our living room, her back turned to me as she stared out the window. The sunlight cast warm glow on her, but it only served to highlight the coldness that had crept into our relationship. "Do you love him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She turned around, her eyes wide with surprise. I could see the guilt etched on her face, a painful reminder of the choices she had made. "What do you mean?" she replied, her voice shaking, but I wasn't interested in her evasions. "I know about the affair," I said, my words coming out in a rush. "I know everything. Texts, the late nights, the lies. You can't deny it anymore." The color drained from her face, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman I had once loved. But it quickly faded as I remembered the pain she had caused me. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear your excuses," I said, my voice firm. "You've destroyed our marriage, and now it's time for you to face the consequences." Her expression shifted from shock to anger. "You think you can just expose this and ruin him? You're being irrational." "I'm being rational," I shot back, my heart racing. "You've turned our lives into a mess, and he's just as guilty. This isn't just about you anymore." The confrontation felt cathartic, but it was only the beginning. I needed to channel this anger into action. I spent the following days preparing myself for the inevitable confrontation with the school board. I wanted to make sure they understood the impact of their professor's actions, not just on my life, but on the lives of students who trusted him as an educator. As I sat down to organize my thoughts, I realized that I was no longer just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my dignity. I owed it to myself to stand up against the betrayal that had rocked my world. The path ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it. With each passing day, my resolve to expose the affair grew stronger. I was no longer just a husband grappling with betrayal. I was a man on a mission, fueled by a desire for justice. I meticulously organized my evidence, ensuring that everything was clear and compelling. I knew that the school board would need more than just my word. They would require concrete proof of the affair to take any action against my former professor. I began to compile a dossier, complete with timestamps of texts and emails between my wife and the professor. I even managed to gather screenshots of social media interactions that hinted at their inappropriate relationship. Each piece of evidence felt like a small victory, a step closer to reclaiming my narrative. I was driven by both anger and a sense of righteousness, convinced that I was doing the right thing by exposing him. Yet, as I prepared for this confrontation, I found myself grappling with lingering doubts. What would this mean for my wife? Would exposing her infidelity only deepen the wounds in our marriage, or could it serve as a wake-up call? I didn't want to destroy her completely. I wanted her to understand the gravity of her actions. But the thought of the professor getting away with his betrayal was unbearable. I spent hours researching the school board's policies on faculty conduct and ethics. I wanted to ensure that I was well informed and prepared for any counterarguments they might present. I needed to be composed and articulate when I finally stood before them. This was not just about revenge. It was about holding someone accountable for their actions. As the day of the meeting approached, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I had rehearsed my speech countless times, but I knew that once I stepped into that room, the reality of the situation would hit me like a tidal wave. I imagined the board members sitting across from me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief as I laid out my case. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed meticulously, donning my best suit, a symbol of my determination and seriousness. I arrived at the school with a knot in my stomach, each step toward the boardroom feeling heavier than the last. As I entered the building, I was struck by the memories of my time there, the lectures that had inspired me, and the friendships I had forged. It felt surreal to think that I was about to confront a man who had once been a mentor to me. When I finally sat down in front of the school board, I took a deep breath and steadied myself. The room was filled with serious faces, and I could sense the tension in the air. I began by introducing myself, detailing my connection to the professor and my wife, and then I launched into the heart of my presentation. I'm here today to bring to light a serious breach of ethics involving Professor Mark Thompson and my wife, Sarah. I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I could see the board members lean in, their interest piqued. What I have to share is not just about a personal betrayal, it is about the integrity of this institution. I laid out the evidence meticulously, presenting each piece with clarity and precision. I could feel their eyes on me, a mixture of skepticism and concern. I detailed the timeline of the affair, highlighting the inappropriate messages and the context in which they were exchanged. I made sure to emphasize the power dynamics at play, the impact on my wife, and the potential consequences for students who looked up to him as a role model. As I spoke, I caught glimpses of the board members exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from disbelief to concern. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I was causing this reaction, that my pain was being acknowledged in such a formal setting. Yet, there was an underlying tension, a sense that I was walking a fine line between vindication and vengeance. After I finished presenting my evidence, there was a moment of silence in the room. The board members looked at each other, processing what they had just heard. I could feel the weight of their scrutiny, and I braced myself for the questions that were sure to come. One of the board members, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, finally broke the silence. "Mr. Stevens, this is a serious allegation. Have you considered the potential ramifications of your actions? This could affect not only Professor Thompson's career but also your marriage." Her words struck a chord, and I felt a flicker of doubt. I had considered the consequences, but in that moment I wondered if I was doing the right thing. Was I willing to sacrifice my marriage for revenge? But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal, and the humiliation of finding my wife with another man. I couldn't let that go unaddressed. "I understand the implications," I replied, my voice firm. But I also believe that accountability is crucial. He has taken advantage of his position, and this affair has shattered my life. I cannot stand idle while he continues to teach and influence students. The discussion continued, and I could see the board members deliberating, weighing the evidence against the potential fallout. I felt a mix of apprehension and hope, wondering if my plea would lead to justice or if it would be swept under the rug. As the meeting wrapped up, I was informed that the board would conduct an investigation into the claims. I left the room feeling a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. It was out of my hands now, and I could only hope that my actions would lead to the accountability I sought. But as I walked out of the school, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. I had exposed the affair, but what would it mean for my marriage? Would my wife ever be able to understand the depths of my pain? The days following my presentation to the school board stretched on, each one filled with a heavy silence that echoed the uncertainty in my heart. I had taken the leap to expose the affair, but now I was left with the aftermath, an emotional landscape littered with the debris of my marriage and the potential consequences for the professor. I felt like I was in limbo, waiting for the board to conclude their investigation while grappling with the reality of my fractured relationship. Sarah and I barely spoke. The air between us was thick with tension, each interaction a painful reminder of what had transpired. I could see her trying to navigate her guilt, but every time she opened her mouth to speak, the words fell flat, empty apologies that did little to heal the wounds. I wanted to scream, to let her know how deeply she had hurt me, but I also felt the weight of her remorse. I was caught in a cycle of conflicting emotions, torn between the desire for closure and the need to confront my own pain. One evening, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, the flickering images reflecting the chaos in my mind. Sarah walked in, her expression tentative as she approached me. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated but nodded, knowing we needed to address the elephant in the room. We sat across from each other, the distance between us feeling insurmountable. "I'm sorry," she began, her eyes welling with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. I made a terrible mistake." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to dismiss her words. "A mistake? Sarah, this was more than a mistake. You betrayed my trust, our marriage. You were with him and you chose to keep it a secret." "I know," she replied, her voice trembling. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it was just a phase, something that would fade away, but it didn't." I felt a mix of anger and pity. "So you thought it was okay to lie to me, to let me believe everything was fine while you were with him?" Her gaze dropped to the floor and I could see the shame washing over her. "I was wrong. I know that now. I never meant to hurt you. I love you and I want to fix this." Her words hung in the air, a fragile lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. But could love really mend what had been broken? I wanted to believe it could, but the betrayal loomed large, casting a shadow over every memory we had shared. "I don't know if I can just forgive and forget," I said, my voice heavy with uncertainty. "This isn't something that can be easily brushed aside. I need time to process everything." "I understand," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll be honest with you from now on, I promise." Her sincerity struck a chord, and for the first time in days I felt a flicker of hope. But that flicker was quickly extinguished as I remembered the professor, the man who had taken advantage of her vulnerability. The thought of him still made my blood boil. "Have you spoken to him since?" I asked, my voice cold. "No," she replied quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "I haven't, I swear. I'm done with him. I just want to focus on us." I wanted to believe her, but doubt lingered in the back of my mind. The investigation into the affair was still ongoing, and I knew that the outcome would shape our future. Would the board take action? Would they hold him accountable, or would this all be swept under the rug? Days turned into weeks, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. I found myself constantly checking my phone, waiting for updates from the school board. The waiting was excruciating, and I began to obsess over every detail. I imagined the professor sitting in his office, confident that he would escape unscathed, while I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. One afternoon, I received a call from one of the board members, a stern man with a reputation for being fair but unwavering. "Mr. Stevens, we've concluded our investigation regarding your allegations against Professor Thompson," he said, his tone serious. "I'd like to meet with you to discuss the findings." My heart raced as I processed his words. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I agreed to meet him the following day, my stomach churning with anticipation. The meeting took place in a small conference room, and as I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. The board member sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "We take these matters very seriously," he began. "After reviewing the evidence you provided, we have determined that there was indeed a breach of professional ethics on the part of Professor Thompson." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of unease. "What does that mean for him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The board has decided to suspend him pending further review," he explained. "We will conduct a hearing to determine the appropriate disciplinary action, which could include termination of his position." The news hit me like a wave, a mixture of satisfaction and guilt flooding my senses. I had achieved what I set out to do, but at what cost? I couldn't shake the feeling that while I had exposed the truth, it had come at the expense of my own moral compass. As I left the meeting, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. I had taken down the man who had betrayed me, but the victory felt hollow. I still had to face my wife, the woman who had hurt me deeply and was now left grappling with the consequences of her actions. When I returned home, Sarah was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "What did they say?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "They're suspending him," I replied, my voice flat. "There will be a hearing to determine if he will be terminated." Her face fell, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "Is that what you wanted?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's what he deserves," I said, my tone firm. "But it doesn't change what happened between us." The reality of my actions settled over us like a heavy blanket, suffocating any hope of reconciliation. I had exposed the affair, but at what cost to our marriage? The days following the board's decision felt surreal. I had achieved what I set out to do. The professor was suspended, and the possibility of his termination loomed over him like a dark cloud. Yet the victory felt hollow. I was left standing amidst the wreckage of my marriage, the air thick with unresolved tension and sorrow. Sarah and I were walking on eggshells around each other. The silence in our home was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional awkward conversation that felt forced and insincere. I could see that she was trying to navigate her guilt, but every attempt to discuss our relationship felt like a painful reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. One evening, as I sat on the couch in the dim light of the living room, I glanced at Sarah, who was sitting across from me, her eyes cast down. "Do you think we can ever move past this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our reality. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart aching. "It's hard to forget what happened. You betrayed my trust, and that's not something that can be easily repaired." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I understand. I wish I could take it back. I never wanted to hurt you." Her words struck a chord, and I felt a flicker of empathy. I knew she was remorseful, but the pain of her actions was still fresh. "I just need time," I said, my voice softer now. "We both need time to figure out what we want." In the days that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the turmoil of our relationship. But even as I focused on my job, the thoughts of Sarah and the affair lingered in the back of my mind. I found myself replaying the events over and over, trying to understand how everything had spiraled so out of control. One afternoon, I received an email from the school board informing me that the hearing regarding the professor's fate would take place in a week. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I had presented my case, but now I would have to face the consequences of my actions in a more public forum. Would the board members see the evidence I had provided as sufficient to terminate his position, or would they side with him, allowing him to escape unscathed? The night before the hearing, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. I wondered if I had done the right thing in exposing the affair. Had I allowed my anger to cloud my judgment? Each question led to more doubt, and I felt like I was spiraling into a dark place. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the school's conference room with a mix of determination and anxiety. I was prepared to present my case again, to ensure that the board understood the impact of the professor's actions not just on me, but on the integrity of the institution itself. As I sat at the table, I could see the board members filing in, their expressions serious. The atmosphere was tense, and I felt the weight of their scrutiny as I prepared to speak. I had gathered more evidence since my last presentation, including testimonials from other students who had witnessed inappropriate behavior from the professor. I knew that this was my chance to ensure that he faced the consequences of his actions. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and began. Thank you for allowing me to present my case today. I want to reiterate the seriousness of the situation and the breach of trust that Professor Thompson has committed. I felt the room's attention shift toward me, and I pressed on, detailing the evidence I had collected. As I spoke, I could see the board members nodding, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. I highlighted the testimonies I had gathered, emphasizing the impact of the professor's actions on the students and the ethical standards of the institution. This is not just about my personal pain. It's about the integrity of the education system and the trust that students place in their educators. After I finished, I sat down, my heart racing. The board members engaged in a discussion, their voices low and serious. I felt a mix of hope and dread, knowing that the outcome could change everything for me, for Sarah, and for the professor. Finally, the board chair turned to me, his expression grave. "Mr. Stevens, we take these matters very seriously. We appreciate the evidence you have provided. However, we must also consider the implications of our decision for all parties involved." I nodded, understanding the weight of their responsibility. "I understand, but I believe that allowing him to continue teaching would send the wrong message. It would imply that such behavior is acceptable, and that cannot be allowed." The board members deliberated for what felt like hours, and I could feel the tension in the room. Finally, the chair spoke again. "We have determined that Professor Thompson will be terminated from his position effective immediately. His actions are in direct violation of our ethical standards, and we cannot condone such behavior." A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a sense of emptiness. I had achieved what I set out to do, but I was left with the weight of the consequences. I had taken down the man who had betrayed me, but the victory felt bittersweet. As I left the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that while justice had been served, I still had to confront the reality of my marriage. I had exposed the affair, but what did that mean for Sarah and me? Would I be able to forgive her, or would the shadow of betrayal linger over us forever? When I returned home, Sarah was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. "They terminated him," I replied, my voice flat. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of relief. "I'm glad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what does this mean for us?" I looked at her, my heart heavy with uncertainty. "I don't know," I admitted. "I need time to process everything. This isn't over for me yet." The road ahead was still unclear, and I knew that while I had taken action against the professor, the real battle lay in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered in our marriage. In the weeks following the hearing, life settled into a new, uneasy rhythm. The professor's termination sent ripples through the school community, and I found myself grappling with the aftermath of my actions. I had sought justice, and I had received it, but at what cost? The victory felt hollow, like a trophy adorned with the scars of betrayal that still marred my heart. Sarah and I were trying to navigate our relationship in the wake of the upheaval. We attended couples counseling, hoping to address the deep-seated issues that had led us here. Each session was a mix of raw honesty and painful confrontation, peeling back the layers of hurt and betrayal. I could see that Sarah was genuinely remorseful, but every time we delved into the past, I felt the weight of her infidelity pressing down on me like a shroud. One evening, after a particularly intense session, we sat in silence in our living room, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I want to understand why I did it," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to know what was going on in my head. I don't want to make excuses, but I want to make sense of it." I turned to her, my heart aching. "How can you make sense of something that doesn't make sense?" I replied, my voice strained. "You had everything, our life, our plans. Why jeopardize it all?" "I don't know," she admitted, tears spilling down her cheeks. I felt lost. I was overwhelmed with everything: work, expectations, life. I thought it was just a distraction, something to make me feel alive again. But I was wrong. I never meant for it to go this far. Her honesty struck a chord, and I felt a flicker of empathy. I realized that her infidelity wasn't just about me, it was about her own struggles that she had never fully shared, but acknowledging that did little to alleviate the pain. "You could have come to me," I said, my voice softer now. "We could have worked through it together." "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. "I was scared. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I was wrong." As we talked, I started to understand the complexity of our situation. Her actions had been a cry for help, a misguided attempt to escape the pressures of life. But that didn't change the fact that she had hurt me deeply. I needed to find a way to forgive her, but the path to healing felt long and fraught with obstacles. As the weeks turned into months, I focused on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, and then there were days when the weight of betrayal would crash down on me like a wave, dragging me back into the depths of my pain. I began to set boundaries, to communicate what I needed from Sarah to feel safe in our relationship again. I wanted transparency, honesty, and a commitment to working through our issues together. It was a delicate dance, but I could see that she was trying. She was committed to making things right, and I appreciated her efforts. One day, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to her and said, "I'm still hurt, Sarah. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again, but I'm willing to try. I want to heal, but it's going to take time." "I understand," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I'm here for the long haul. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve." As we sat in the fading light, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could rebuild what had been lost, but it would take effort from both of us. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days of struggle, but I was willing to fight for our marriage. The professor's actions had caused a seismic shift in our lives, but they had also forced us to confront the cracks in our foundation. In a way, his betrayal had opened the door for us to explore our own vulnerabilities and weaknesses. It was a painful process, but I hoped it would lead us to a stronger, more authentic relationship. With time, I began to notice small changes in our dynamic. We started to communicate more openly, sharing our fears and dreams, and slowly, the walls we had built began to crumble. I learned to express my feelings without fear of judgment, and Sarah learned to be vulnerable, to share her struggles instead of hiding them away. As the months passed, the scars of betrayal still lingered, but they became less painful. I started to see Sarah not just as the woman who had hurt me, but as a partner who was willing to grow and change. The journey was far from over, but I felt a renewed sense of commitment to our marriage, a willingness to fight for us. In the end, I realized that while I had sought revenge against the professor for his betrayal, the true battle lay in healing my own heart and rebuilding my marriage. It was a complex journey filled with challenges, but I was determined to emerge stronger on the other side. As I looked at Sarah, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a reflection of our shared commitment to rebuild and grow together. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, hand in hand with the woman I still loved. And so our story continued, not just marked by betrayal, but also by resilience, growth, and the unwavering desire to reclaim our lives together.